So on January 28th, 2022, 44-year-old Karen Reed decided to go out to the bar with her 46-year-old boyfriend, John O'Keefe. On this night, it was a crazy blizzard in Canton, Massachusetts. All of Karen and John's friends were meeting up at a local bar called Waterfall to have a blizzard party, so they were all just going to meet up at the bar and drink and hang out. Now, one thing to mention about Canton, Massachusetts is a very, very expensive part to live in, and a lot of people who live there are most likely either first responders, so there's a lot of police officers and nurses and firefighters, paramedics. And when I was looking at the real estate on Zillow for like the cheapest house in Canton, Massachusetts, the cheapest one I could find was $650,000, and that was just for like a 3-bedroom 2-bath. So like that right there tells you what tax bracket you need to be in order to live in this town. As far as a little bit of backstory on John O'Keefe, 46-year-old John O'Keefe was a retired Boston police officer and served 16 years on the force. He was described by everyone that knew him as very determined and hardworking. He was the type of man that life could throw any challenge at him and he'd be able to handle it. And even when his sister unfortunately passed away, John decided to adopt both of her kids, so technically his niece and his nephew, and made it his goal to give them the life that they deserve and take care of them. As far as Karen Reed was a 44-year-old woman from Canton, Massachusetts, and she actually worked as an equity analyst and also was an adjunct professor, which I had never heard of the term adjunct professor, but basically they're professors that work at colleges typically for a specific course or only for one semester, and currently Karen was teaching at Bentley University where she taught finance. So on January 28th, 2022, Karen and John decided to go out to Waterfall and meet up with a bunch of their friends, but John had gone there first. I'm assuming he got a ride from one of his friends because Karen ended up showing up later in the night. The group that was there that night was a pretty large group of around 10 to 12 people, and so far John and Karen have been dating for around 2 years, and on security footage of the bar you can see Karen greeting John, and she even gives him a little kiss on the forehead when she sees him. And it seems like throughout the entire night Karen and John were very lovey towards one another. They seemed to be having a great time. Even throughout all the security footage you can see Karen just like always jumping and having a good time. So nothing with her interactions or John's interactions throughout the night didn't really seem that noticeable. So around 12:15, that's when the group decided to all leave and keep the party going and continue drinking at a man named Brian Albert's house. And Brian Albert was also like at the bar with everyone, so he was basically just saying like, let's keep the night going and go to my house. So that's when Karen and John got in the car, Karen driving and John in the passenger, and that's when John had texted another woman that was at the bar named Jen McCabe. And so he texted Jen McCabe where to, and she replied with the address. Is when John had called Jen to ask her where the house was. At 12:31 a.m. Jen would text John telling him to park behind her car, and then at 12:40 a.m. she texted him saying, where are you? Karen and John both show up to the party, but at this point Karen had told John that she's feeling a bit tired and she just feels like she wants to go back to the house. And so John says, okay, that's fine, I'm still gonna be here. So John gets out the car, Karen gets out the driveway and drives back to John's house. And between the hours of 12:50 and 5 a.m. is when Karen would call John 53 times and leave 8 different voicemails. These voicemails saying things on there such as, quote, John, I cannot babysit your niece, you need to come home right now. And quote, you are effing using me right now. You're effing another girl. Your niece is sleeping next to me. You're an effing loser.
Ms. Gilman, would you kindly play the voicemail for 12:37:08?
12:59:24 a.m. The defendant calls John. Voicemail number 3 is left with voice.
John, I'm here with your kids. Nobody knows what the you want, you pervert.
At 1:10:17 a.m. The defendant calls John. Voicemail number 5 is left.
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning. I'm with your niece and nephew. You pervert. You're a pervert.
At 1:17:37 a.m. The defendant calls John. So when voicemail 6 is left with voice.
John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit your niece. I need to go home. You are using me right now. You're another girl sleeping next to me. You're a loser. Get out.
6:03:02 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number 8 is left with some voice and noise and background.
And during these voicemails is when John's niece actually calls a family friend named Carrie and basically tells Carrie that John hasn't come home yet, and Karen's really concerned. She's kind of freaking out. And while Carrie's on the phone with John's niece, she can hear Karen screaming in the background. So she's just like, okay, I'm pretty sure everything's okay. Let me call around to local hospitals. She called around for local hospitals, but unfortunately none of them had admitted a John O'Keefe. After she had called the hospitals, that's when she went to Karen's house to kind of help with the situation, and when she was at Karen's house is when she called the police.
Please stop and go.
Hi, my name is Carrie. I'm calling because my friend's boyfriend did not come home last night. We were at Waterfall, and now she is calling me hysterical because she doesn't know where he is. You didn't pick anybody up by the name of John O'Keefe, did you?
John O'Keefe?
Yeah, he's a Boston cop, and he would be on foot, but...
No.
I think he probably got a ride and passed out at someone's house. I don't know, but...
Yeah, but no, we didn't lock anybody up or anything like that. Is the wife home? You said your girlfriend?
It's his girlfriend, yeah. They were out having drinks, and then she left and expected him to come home at some point, and he never did. You know, my husband had been out with them earlier in the night, but then he came home. And he has custody of his niece and nephew because their parents passed away. He's nervous because he never even called the niece.
Yeah.
So she's like, I feel like something happened, and I said, okay. Someone probably picked him up and he passed out. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
He didn't drive last night?
No.
No. Okay. Well, I mean, as of right now, it's more, you know, he just didn't come home last night. Is this common sometimes?
Yeah.
Happen with him?
No. That's why. That's since he didn't tell his niece. That's kind of why she's more freaking out. But like I said, he's a Boston police officer. He knows a bunch of people. Anybody could have picked him up.
You didn't get any calls, anything like that. Nobody was arrested or anything like that. You know.
Okay.
All righty.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right. No problem. Good luck.
Okay.
See ya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And it was suspected that at some point Karen had taken a nap through the night, just kind of hoping that when she woke up, John would be there. But when she woke up at 4:50 a.m. and John still wasn't home, this is when she started to get a very sinking feeling. Maybe he wasn't out with another girl, and maybe something was actually really wrong. At 4:53 a.m. is when Karen contacts her friend Jen McCabe, the woman that John was texting the night before, asking her where the house was. So Karen calls her at 4:53 a.m., tells her everything, says that John hasn't come home yet, and she's kind of freaking out because she doesn't know where he's at. So Jen's like, okay, that's fine, just come over to my house. So Karen and Carrie get in the car, they drive over to Jen's house, and all three of them get in the car. Jen's in the passenger, Karen's in the back, and Carrie's driving. But unfortunately, during this time, it was around 6:30 a.m., so it was still a little bit dark outside, and the blizzard was still coming down. It was suspected to get 6 to 7 inches of snow this night, so they really couldn't see much. And then they decided to go back to John's house, hoping that maybe he had found his way back home and was back there, but unfortunately was met with no luck. So that's when they decided to go past Colin Albert's house, the house where the party was happening at last night. So as they're passing the house and as they're coming up to it, that's when Karen looks out the window and she starts yelling, "That's him, that's him." And she rushes out the back door, and lying in the snow right next to the fire hydrant was unfortunately the body of 46-year-old John O'Keefe. When Karen saw John, she immediately tried to lift up her shirt to try to apply heat to John. At one point, Carrie started doing CPR and chest compressions while Karen performed mouth to mouth. And while that was happening is when Jen decided to call the police.
911 is under where's your emergency? Hello?
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you come to 34 Fairview Road in Houston?
34 Fairview?
Yes, there's a man unresponsive in the snow.
Okay. What else?
He's got to get here, okay?
Okay. What's going on? Is he face down?
We just flipped him over.
Okay. And who's that in the background? Is that someone related?
That's his girlfriend. His name is John Keefe.
Okay, how old is he?
John is 46 years old.
46. How long has he been outside?
I don't know. I don't know.
he got out of the car and it could have been a couple of hours. Is he, Terry? Is he? I don't know if he's breathing. There are two women trying to intimidate body and they're hysterical.
Okay, can you just try to ask him? I know it's tough, but we have the fire department go and they just got to know.
Okay. Is he breathing, you guys? It doesn't seem to be breathing.
Okay, do they know how to do CPR? Do they want to attempt CPR?
Yes, he's got to do CPR. No, I guess he's gone.
Okay, they don't feel comfortable doing so?
No, I think he's passed away.
And one thing to note about Jen's phone call that I thought was a little bit odd is how calm she is. How she calmly says, I think he passed away. And she at one point even yells at Karen to get off of John. And she also mentions in her 911 call that she believes there's blood on his face. Meaning at one point, Jen did see John's body. Keep that in mind because she says something completely opposite in the trial later on. Paramedics arrive there at 6:32 a.m., but unfortunately when medics got there, they believed that they weren't able to save John. John was taken to the hospital. There really wasn't much that they could do to save him, so he was pronounced dead. Within John's autopsy, it did seem as if he was attacked. This didn't seem like something like he fell down or he fell asleep extremely drunk. He was found wearing a t-shirt underneath a hoodie, and that t-shirt was torn apart and dirty, as well as his hoodie that had a huge cut down the middle, as well as also being very dirty. He had on dirty jeans that also had a slight tear in the right pocket. He suffered 2 black eyes and was found with only 1 shoe on. And even when you look at the injuries on his arms, he had consistent scratch marks on his arm as if he was attacked. There was bruises on his knuckles and his hands. And most importantly, there was also a very huge 2-inch gash on the back of his head that was very, very deep, as if he was hit with something due to blunt force trauma. So since John's body clearly did look like an attack, typically after this there would be an investigation. And I say typically because everything about this crime scene and how the police handle it is anything but typical. When the police first arrived to the scene and John's body was taken to the hospital, they started to investigate the crime scene. Now, usually when police are called onto the scene, to which at this point they did know that it was a retired Boston police officer, in the snow were little drops of blood, but weirdly the police officers claimed that they had no DNA evidence bags. So what they decided to do instead was knock on the door of a neighbor who was also an ex-police officer, asked him if they could borrow some red Solo cups, and then they just took 6 red Solo cups, scooped out the snow, and put those 6 red Solo cups into a Stop and Shop paper bag. And that was the evidence, and that's how this was stored for this crime scene. And again, this is not typical of a crime scene whatsoever. Typically in a situation like this, if they clearly see blood, they will not just be so careless, probably go back down to the station to get more evidence bags and come back, maybe ask someone to bring some over before even touching the evidence. Now again, this was still during a blizzard, so it was still kind of dark and the snow was just piling on. So they, at one point, in order to help the situation, they decided to use a leaf blower to blow away the snow in hopes of like uncovering more evidence underneath all of the snow, which again is just so outrageous. Why would you? I understand that you don't want to like disrupt the evidence, then why not just don't touch it at all? Most likely whatever is underneath there will be there tomorrow, so just don't touch it and wait until the blizzard is over. But they didn't. They continued to use this leaf blower, to which they didn't really uncover anything except for a half broken cocktail glass. What is typical of a crime scene? They will usually question neighbors, try to get Ring doorbell footage, a bunch of these different sources to try to figure out what truly happened. The place of where John O'Keefe Keefe's body was found was next to a fire hydrant, but this fire hydrant was actually at the end of the front yard of Brian Albert's home. So since John O'Keefe's body was found in the front lawn of Brian Albert's home, it would only make sense to investigate the home and talk to Brian Albert. But the leading lieutenant that was there when all of this was going on, he was actually longtime friends with Brian Albert, like since they were kids. So from Lieutenant's recollection, he said that he actually did question Brian Albert. He knocked on the door. He was met with Brian and his wife Nicole, who seemed like they had just woken up, and he talked in the foyer area. He didn't go anywhere past in the house. Talked to them for about 15-20 minutes and then left and never spoke to them again. And that is something also very frustrating you'll see about this case, is how the police never questioned anyone. If John was last seen at this bar and then the last place he was supposed to go to was inside Brian Albert's house, you would think that the police would question everyone that was at the bar, question everyone at the party, and investigate Brian's home, but they did none of the above. So the next day when the police returned to the scene, now the blizzard had died down, so they were able to really figure out what was underneath all of the snow. So they came back with evidence bags and they came back with shovels. They started to investigate the area, and underneath all the snow, they started to find pieces of a tail light. It was a little bit odd. It was about 6 to 8 pieces, and they didn't see these tail lights the day before either. They're just assuming that they're seeing them now for the first time because of all the snow that was on top of it. And what they find is that these tail lights are actually a perfect match to Karen's SUV, to which ironically Karen's SUV, her right tail light was completely shattered. And so the police kind of put these two things together, and on February 1st arrested Karen for second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol, and leaving the scene where a potential injury or death occurred.
Today, grand jury indicted you on these charges, which is second-degree murder, vehicular homicide, and leaving the scene of a death. Okay? So those are the charges that grand jury indicted you on. So now you're being charged and will be arraigned in Superior Court, Norfolk County Superior Court in Devon. Okay?
So bail doesn't apply anymore?
Typically, I'm not, so we don't set the bail. But typically, once murder comes into play, people are going to get bailed out.
So it's not manslaughter anymore, is that the difference?
That's correct. It's a higher degree of taking a life. Okay, so that's the charges that you're being charged with now. And you were indicted by grand jury.
Okay, you're aware he was beaten up by Colin Albert. I mean, we're all in on the same joke, right?
Which again, in my opinion, are very harsh charges to be charged with, especially 2 days afterwards. And the only connection that they have is Karen's taillight being broken and the taillight pieces being found in the snow. Other than that, they really don't have anything else onto Karen. They, at this point, didn't even know the results of John's autopsy yet, but nonetheless, these are the extreme charges that she was given. So in attendance at this party, as I said, was Brian Albert, the owner of the home, his wife Nicole. Jen McCabe was also there with her husband Matt, and they were all celebrating Brian Albert's son's birthday. So also at the party was Brian Albert's son Brian Jr. and Brian Albert's nephew Colin. So these are the confirmed individuals that we know were at this party, but again, weirdly, none of these people were interrogated after the fact. Even though they had this connection with Karen's SUV, it would be around this time that some pretty intense footage would be found. It was a clip of Karen pulling out of Brian Albert's driveway as she was dropping John off. And in this footage, you see her backing up and she accidentally hits the car behind her. And you can also tell that she hit the parked car behind her because the parked car kind of shakes a little bit as if she hit the car. And then when you see her drive off, you zoom in and you can see that there is a piece of her tail light missing. She had hit her car, those were the taillights on the ground, and then she drove off. But how in the world would her taillight pieces go from the driveway all the way down to the front of the lawn by the fire hydrant where John's body was found? And so the main theory that people were going with, and the reason why Karen was even arrested in the first place, was because police had suspicion that she had hit John with the back of her car while going 24 miles an hour and then just drove off and left him there. But again, this really wouldn't make sense if her taillight pieces were found in the driveway but then later found in front of the fire hydrant. They also said that John's injuries does not match up with someone who was hit by a car. Usually if you were hit by a car, you would see a lot more blunt force trauma, bruising, broken bones even, more impact injuries. But in this case, John was found with 2 black eyes, scratches all up and down his arm, and the scratches on his arm were not jagged as if they came from plastic of a taillight. They were very consistent. And same thing with the huge gash on the back of his head. How did he get that gash on the back of his head if he would have been hit by the car?
Is the injury to the head that you saw consistent with having been struck by a vehicle?
It is not, no, sir. To get the injury, it was a fracture at the occipital region of the head, which is basically on the back bottom part of the head. In order to have that part of the head contacted by the taillight, you would somehow have to have a configuration or be standing in a manner that the rest of your body doesn't get hit, because there's no other significant injuries to the body. So the fact that we only have that head injury and only damage to the occipital portion of the skull is inconsistent in this case with being struck by that tail light.
But police did find that these scratches didn't really seem consistent with a car crash, but more of an attack from an animal. And ironically, Brian Albert actually owned his own German Shepherd named Chloe, who in the past had had a history of attacking strangers. And double ironically, Chloe was actually rehoused just a couple months after John's body was found. So now let's get into the relationship between Karen and John. So Karen and John had actually met when they were way younger, but since they were young, things just didn't really work out. So they decided to reconnect in 2020 and had been dating ever since. And when John's brother was brought to the trial, he would also talk about Karen and John's relationship and said that things at first were going really well, but apparently John had cheated on Karen. This made Karen very paranoid. They both got into lots of arguments, and John's brother was also a witness to one of their drunken arguments before. Other witnesses would say the complete opposite. Another witness that was at the bar that night said that she loved Karen and John's relationship. She felt like no ill will or no tension between them two. They felt like a very happy couple. And although there was speculation that John was still cheating, there was also major speculation that Karen was cheating as well. And this would be revealed later at her trial when text message conversations between Karen and another man named Brian Higgins, who was also at the party and at the bar that night. It was suspected that Karen and Brian Higgins kind of had a flirtatious relationship going on. And one of the conversations read, quote, and just for context, the blue is Brian Higgins and the gray is Karen. Brian Higgins says, "Foul ball." Karen replies, "You stink." Brian replies, "You suck and you're trouble." Karen replies, "You're hot." Brian says, "Are you serious or messing with me?" "No, I'm serious. Feeling is mutual. Is that bad? How long have you thought that?" Karen replies, "Are you okay driving? You don't want to stay here?"
My question is, were you or were you not sexually attracted to my client?
Yes.
Romantically attracted?
I'm not going to go there. No, I don't agree with that.
Of course you're not going to go there, because that would put you in a very awkward position, wouldn't it, sir?
The defense seems to suggest Brian Higgins may have been so attracted to Karen Reed that he lured John O'Keefe to the after-party, planning to get him out of the way.
Now, Brian Higgins was at the party, and he was also an ATF agent and claimed to have had a pretty long flirtatious relationship with Karen, and even showed more conversations between the two, saying things like, quote, Karen says, "John said Brian is being wishy-washy now. Haha, did you tell him you texted me? No. Thumbs up emoji." Brian then texts again, "You cranky now? Haha, no. Just being so anti-couples. Most couples don't even like each other. Name a few." Name a few. I don't know, all of them? They all want to hang out with single people. Brian then texts again, you think you can handle me? I thought you were happy. Karen says, how do you know if I'm happy? I just assumed. Are you hard to handle? What do you like about me? I just feel like you're from my neighborhood. Yeah, ditto. And then after this, Brian and Karen did exchange text messages for Karen and Brian to meet up at Karen's home near Brian's work, and then went on to have other conversations. Karen replies with, quote, come over to my house. Brian says, when? Karen says, when works for you? Brian says, whoever, whenever, when works for you. Karen says, I asked you first. Brian says, I think you're messing with me. And then Karen replies after that saying, quote, I'm glad you came over tonight. And Brian says, me too, balls in your court. What do you want to do, Karen? You looked great tonight. Brian says, are you breaking up or staying together? Karen says, I don't know. He hooked up with another girl on vacation and I'm very close to his niece. It's a very messed up situation. Brian says, quote, what was that? And how did you find out he hooked up? I don't want to complicate your situation. So now is when things get even more confusing, because the more people that are brought up to the stand during the trial, when people were trying to figure out who had committed this crime, if it was actually Karen, because Karen was already charged and they were just trying to figure out if she was the one that did this crime or not. But at this point, it seems like Karen might be innocent. And then at the trial, that's when more people started to even say that they were at the party and they didn't even see John, even though Karen claimed that when she dropped off John, she had seen John go through the front door. So people at the party, Brian Albert, Nicole Albert, Brian Jr., Brian Albert's nephew Colin, all of these people started to claim that they didn't even see John at the party to begin with. And this would be semi-supported by John's phone history. So when they looked into John's phone, they looked into his phone's pinging and noticed that John did indeed go up the driveway of the house. His phone then went to the fire hydrant at the end of the driveway, and that's where it stopped. So it seemed like John, or at least John's phone, didn't go inside the house, but that's also very confusing, because how did John's phone end up by the fire hydrant to even begin with? And also, furthermore, how did none of the partygoers that night that were leaving the home see John's body as they were driving out and driving past the house? There was actually footage taken as an example of what it would look like for someone to back out of the home's driveway and leave in the direction. And even if you were to imagine snow on the ground, you would definitely see a body or blood, even if you were just driving past the home. It's not like his body was towards the middle of the lawn or up by the side of the house where you can't really see him. He was near the end of the front lawn, usually where people would be driving. There was also a snowplow driver that went through that same road around 2:45 a.m. that night. He was also brought to trial and asked if he saw anything unusual when he was doing his normal routes, and he just replied with, quote, I saw nothing. And that's all he said. There was even a sergeant who was brought on to trial as well, because before there was a paramedic that was on the scene and claims that when she got to the scene and had discovered John, she claimed that she heard Karen yelling the words, quote, I hit him, I hit him. And the paramedic said that when Karen said that, an officer that was nearby looked to Karen and asked her, what? And Karen replied again saying, I hit him. Now, a sergeant is on the trial and says the complete opposite, and he claims that he never once heard Karen say, I hit him.
So she said, I hit him. She repeated it, and there was a police officer who was in that vicinity kind of with us who replied, you what? She repeated it one more time.
While you were on scene at 34 Fairview for an hour and 40 minutes, did you ever once hear Karen Reed say, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him?
I did not.
And you wrote a report regarding this, correct?
I did.
How many pieces of taillight did you find on or around that property?
That morning, none.
And so at the trial is when the court starts to bring up the crime scene photos of the day of and start talking about how they were handling all of the evidence on this crime scene. They were keeping all of their evidence in red Solo cups. There was a half broken cocktail glass that they probably just threw over their shoulder because that's how careless they were with this crime scene. And then even all of the plastic little like tail light pieces, they just kind of threw into a bag and brought to the station, again without doing any DNA testing on the individual taillight samples to see if there was DNA on there that came up to be John's, because if John was hit by this car, there would be traces of DNA or blood on these pieces, but weirdly they never tested any of them.
The blood drops were secured into 6 Solo cups.
And why were they secured into 6 Solo cups?
We did the best that we could with the situation, with the weather and deteriorating situation. Lieutenant Gallagher was able to attain the Solo cups from Lieutenant Kelleher's house, which was diagonally across the street.
Bag sitting next to it?
I do.
Doesn't look like an evidence bag, does it?
No, it looks like a Stop and Shop bag.
Stop and
But
Shop.
actually, it looks like an evidence bag. It just doesn't say Canton Police on it. It says Stop and Shop, but it does look like an evidence bag. It's the same thing.
That's a grocery bag.
It is. And that's exactly what our evidence bags look like, so that's what I thought it was at first.
Right, except it doesn't say anything about evidence on it. It says Stop and Shop, correct?
Correct.
What do you think's in that evidence bag? I'm sorry, Stop and Shop bag.
I'm not sure.
Well, one of the ways that you can tell that evidence tape has been put on an item is because when the evidence tape is placed on it, it's completely sealed. And if, in fact, that seal is ever broken, it's not torn off, it's cut, and there's initials put on, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Have you ever used evidence tape before? To seal anything?
I'm sure I have. I don't recall off the top of my head.
How long have you been a detective?
So again, a lot of things with this crime scene was very heavily mishandled. When Karen was arrested, she was given a breathalyzer test and actually blew a 0.8, which is right on the line of the legal limit. But since it was a little bit over, they still charged her with driving under the influence. In my opinion, is a little bit crazy considering everyone else in the group was seen on security footage at the bar drinking, and then they get in their cars and then they drive off as if everyone was driving drunk, yet Karen was the only one being charged with this. Now, although she blew a 0.8 the following day, police did speculate that if they were to give her a breathalyzer on January 28, they suspected her BAC level to be between 0.13 and 0.29, which is extremely high. Now, when the officers that were brought to the stand were asked why they didn't do a search of Brian's home, all the lieutenant did was go inside of Brian's home. He had a quick 15-20-minute conversation with Brian and Nicole, and then that was it. They never searched Brian's home. So the court is asking them, well, why didn't you?
You had an officer, Boston police officer, who was either dead or dying on the front lawn of a house with a bunch of occupants, and you didn't think that it was necessary to investigate or interview those occupants yourself?
No, I did not.
Did you look around the house for any sign of a struggle or a fight?
No.
Did you go to the basement at all? No. Did you personally observe whether or not that house has a bulkhead door that services the basement?
I have no idea.
Inside the house, did you photograph any part of the house?
No.
Now let's get into Jen McCabe and her side of the story, because Jen McCabe was also brought to the trial as well. But Karen's defense actually brings out a very odd thing about Jen's phone history. At 2:27 a.m., Jen would Google on her Safari, quote, "How long does a body die in cold?" Now, she was trying to say, how long does a body die in the cold? We're assuming that she was probably intoxicated or in a rush when she was writing this, because it was at 2:27 a.m.
Did you, in fact, use a phrase to Google search how long it takes for someone to die of extreme temperatures?
I did in the morning at the request of your client.
You see this first search that says how long to die in cold?
I do.
What's that time?
2:27 a.m.
Ms. McCabe, you made that search at 2:27 a.m. because you knew that John O'Keefe was outside in your sister's lawn dying in the cold, didn't you?
Absolutely not.
So that right there is lying on the stand, because she claimed that she searched this in the morning when she got to the scene and she was instructed to by Karen. But when she was confronted with the actual receipt and was confronted with, no, you didn't, you researched this at 2:27 a.m., it seemed like Jen just didn't really know what to say besides, I don't know, or I didn't do that. And now we're gonna get into another person in this case named Michael Proctor, who was an investigator into Karen's case. And Michael Proctor, you will soon see, is a very creepy individual. He was on speaker with a couple of other officers while he was searching through Karen's phone, and when they had asked him, did you find anything yet, Michael replies with, quote, no nudes yet.
What did you tell your colleagues that you were looking for as you sat looking through Karen Reed's phone?
No nudes so far.
No nudes so far, correct?
Correct.
And you said that to your bosses.
Yes, sir.
And if you thought that was weird, this creep would go on to send another text to a party goer of the night of the party. And this party goer would tell Michael Proctor, quote, I'm sure the owner of the house will receive some PUSSY. Michael replies with, nope, the owner of the house is a Boston cop too, referring to John and Brian. And you would think that it ends there, but this officer, Michael Proctor, goes on to text another officer about Karen and like how she's attractive. And this officer texted Michael saying, quote, is she hot at least? And Michael replies with, quote, yup, she's a babe. Weird Riverfall accent though, no ass.
What else did you say in response to she hot at least, question mark?
So following that text, I responded, yep, she's a babe. Weird Fall River accent though, no ass.
Yeah, she's a babe. Who's the she?
Miss Reed.
Think that's appropriate?
Absolutely not. Unprofessional and regrettable comments are something I'm not proud of, and I shouldn't have wrote in a private or any type of setting.
So another man is introduced to the stand. His name is Michael Lenk, and Michael Lenk is actually the lieutenant that I was talking about earlier that was on the scene the day of the crime and spoke to Brian and Nicole for about 15-20 minutes. Michael Lenk was the lieutenant on this scene. So the court then asked Michael Lenk, well, when you spoke to them for 15 to 20 minutes, what did you conclude out of that conversation? And Michael Lenk just replies with saying, quote, they were the homeowners. And that's it. That's what he's claiming. All he got out of that 15 to 20 minute conversation was Brian and Nicole were the homeowners. Again, Lieutenant Michael Lenk and Brian have been friends since they were kids, keeping that in mind. Michael also goes on to say that when he was in the home, he never went past the foyer, and he also never saw a dog or any sort of animal walking around the house. Now, at this point, the court then gives Michael Lenk an evidence box, and within the evidence box was the broken cocktail glass. And so Michael Lenk was then asked to put on evidence gloves and show everyone the cocktail glass that was broken and found at the crime scene. But the way that Michael Lenk treats this evidence, he literally treats it like he's opening up his sandwich from Jersey Mike's, just rambunctious.
Sorry, sir, before you just go into that, just with reference to the bag that you have before you, what, if any, markings are on that relate to sort of your case, your case number with Ken, please?
And it's listed as broken drinking glass. And
have you seen the item contained within that bag earlier this morning as well?
Yes.
And what you observed within that bag, is that the piece of the cocktail glass that you observed on the front yard area of 34 Fairview Road on January 29th, 2022?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask that the witness be allowed to take it out of the bag and display it for the jury.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. You can place it back in the bag.
Michael Lank also got further torn up by the court by claiming that he only spoke to Jen, McCabe, Brian, and Nicole, but he did not speak to Carrie or Karen. But when dash cam footage would be shown to the court of that day, of that morning when John's body was found, not only do they see Michael Lank talking to Carrie, but they also see Michael Lank talking on the phone with someone and even walking off camera and back onto camera. And for some reason, Michael Lank cannot remember what that phone call was about or who he was talking to, but weirdly remembers the conversation with Brian and Nicole.
I believe right there. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Who is that?
I believe it's Kerry Roberts.
Okay. Let's go ahead and play it. Pause it. Did you see yourself just exit screen right?
Yes.
It appeared that you had something in your hand.
Yes.
You were taking a call
Yes.
On your cell phone.
Yes.
What was that call?
I don't recall. It could have. I can't see what time that is. I don't believe that I made the call to the CPAC unit until around 6:38, so I'm not sure who that call was from.
Michael then claims that he was on the phone with dispatch, where on dispatch he had told them, quote, he does have some trauma to the head. I'm not sure if he's been in a fight or whatever. Our medics believe he's not gonna make it. Now, a medical examiner was also brought up to the stand to ask them questions about what they believed John's injuries came from. And this medical examiner claimed that she believes this could not have been caused by someone getting hit by a car because, again, there would be a lot more impact injuries like bruising and broken bones. But in John's situation, this definitely seemed like the attack of an animal, especially with his arms and the consistent scratches on his arms. That looks something like an animal. There were even puncture wounds on his arms and his hands, again, as if the tips of a claw of an animal.
What evidence do they actually have to prove that that SUV ever hit John? The answer is none, and John's injuries did not come from being hit by a car. The evidence is simple. John got into an altercation. He got hit and he fell to the ground, fracturing his skull. At some point during that altercation, the dog got a hold of him. Every single injury is explained by that. The actual truth in this case, how did this happen? How did we end up here? We ended up here because of relationships and building a tall blue wall.
I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Those are the words of the defendant. 4 times. You heard testimony from 4 different witnesses.
And this trial ends in a mistrial. It's basically an I don't know and I don't care. And that's literally what they're saying. A lot of people have also had very conflicting views on the judge for this case as well, because she was the same judge for the second trial that we are now about to go into. The judge claimed as a final statement of the trial, saying, quote, after our rigorous efforts, we find ourselves at an impasse. Our perspective is that the evidence is starkly divided. The deep division is not due to a lack of effort or diligence, but rather a sincere adherence to our individual principles and moral convictions. To continue to deliberate would be futile and only force us to compromise these deeply held beliefs. And even at the end of her saying that, the judge even looks over to John's family and says, quote, I'm not going to do that to you folks. Your service is complete. I'm declaring a mistrial in this case, which again is very odd because I don't know if I'm just reading this wrong. I don't know if maybe I didn't understand what the judge was trying to say, but a mistrial is not really justice because you still don't know who murdered your brother, who murdered your son, who murdered John O'Keefe. You still get no answers. So I don't know why the judge is saying that to the family as if it's like a good thing. Again, I don't know if I'm reading this wrong because the way that the judge says it, she says it very sweetly, but I don't know if that really is a very sweet thing to do. So even though this case was deemed as a mistrial, this case was not over, because after this case had been declared a mistrial, all of the jurors that were in this trial started to come forward about their stories and what actually happened in the courtroom that day. And one juror even came forward to claim that everyone in the room pled Karen not guilty, but then at the last second, the judge just randomly said that the jury had concluded a mistrial.
All 12 of you inside that jury room agree that Karen Reed was not guilty of murder. Count 1 in that indictment.
Correct.
Okay, now let's roll up our sleeves a little bit. How did you vote? Was there a raising of the hands? Was there someone writing down what your vote was? Was it a secret ballot? How do you know, and how was the process that all 12 agreed that she was not guilty of murder? Count 1.
So we all raised our hands in terms of a vote, and we voted on that first count that we all agreed not guilty. Unfortunately, at that time, we did not fill out any of the paperwork there, nor sign it. So we were under the understanding that each charge could not be treated separately. And so we continued to deliberate, despite the fact that we had agreed on 2 of the counts as not guilty.
And the second count was count 3, and the same process where I guess the foreperson is asking for a vote and everyone raised their hands?
And everybody agreed not guilty for those 2 charges. That's correct.
So the juror in question claims that they never went back on the 2 charges, and the 2 charges they're referring to is second-degree murder and manslaughter. Now, at first, this was going to be hard because according to the 5th Amendment, that basically protects someone from getting tried for the same crime twice. But since Karen was never officially charged with the OUI, which is operating a vehicle under the influence, they still had a little bit of room and the upper hand to really give her that non-guilty plea, but also move forward into figuring out who actually did kill John. So Karen's defense team tried for a retrial, and it was actually granted on April 1st, 2025, and then mid-May 2025, this year, her retrial had started. The whole trial, the second trial, lasted around 31 days, and 41 witnesses came to the stand to testify. Hello everyone, it's still me, just thanking the sponsor of today's episode, Shopify. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can easily begin to overrun your life. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. Get started with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your business into money with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial starting today at shopify.com/behind. Go to shopify.com/behind. That is shopify.com/behind. So since the trial was 2025 this year, the last trial that they had was back in 2022. So all of the information that is now being shown and all of these witnesses that are coming to the stand are recalling 2-year-old information and also looking at 2-year-old documents. Now again, Karen's team did kind of have the upper hand because since there is such a time gap between the last trial and this trial, if the people within the trial were actually lying, lying, they're gonna slip up at one point. They're gonna forget that they said something in a testimony to a police officer on the day of the crime. If they're lying, they're not gonna get their story straight, and they're gonna completely forget the story that they told. So again, this leaves Karen's team with the upper hand to figure out these inconsistencies and catch them in more lies.
So are you going through all the police reports that you've looked at prior and all the statements? You're going through everything again?
You got to go through everything again, because every time you get something new, it's not what is this on its face. In my case, it's what's changed. What are they saying now versus what did they say 6 months ago, 12, 18 months ago? So you're always doing, I mean, I've got some things in a spreadsheet, that's how my mind has always worked, but some things you just have to read. You've got to go through the court minutes, go through the transcripts. What did this witness say, or what did this responding officer say back on February 10th, 2022? Well, now he's saying this. So you've got to always compare and see what's changed.
At the second trial, Jen McCabe was again brought up to the stand, and at the second trial, not only were they able to confront Jen with these Google searches, but they were also to confront Jen, basically showing everyone on the big screen. They were now noticing that that Google search that she had made at 2:27 a.m. saying, how long does a body die in the cold? That Google search at 2:27 a.m., they're now finding out was actually deleted off of her phone, and then at 6:23 a.m. she had Google searched the same exact thing with the same exact mispronunciation.
But the reality is your first search didn't comport with the 2:27 a.m. search, did it? It was a different spelling, wasn't it?
I never searched a 227. That is not reality.
But the 6:24 search did exactly mirror the search that, according to this report, took place at 2:27, correct?
I'm sure Celebrate will be able to explain it to you. I can't.
And then of those three searches, one of them ended up deleted. Isn't that right?
I never deleted any search.
Colin Albert deleted. What do you see?
I see a yes.
Ms. McCabe, the reason you deleted that 2:27 a.m. call is because you realized that if you were caught Googling how long it takes for a person to die in the cold 3.5 hours before John's body was found, that would incriminate you, wouldn't it?
Objection.
The objection sustained.
Did you delete that search because you knew that you would be implicated in John O'Keefe's death if that search was found on your phone?
Could you answer that, please?
I did not delete that search. I never made that search at 2:23. I never would have left John O'Keefe out in the cold to die because he was my friend that I loved.
Jen was also questioned about her phone call log history, claiming that she had made a lot of phone calls during the night and during the day, and also during the times where she was supposedly sleeping. She claimed that most of her calls that she had made that night were most likely butt dials because she wasn't really paying attention to her phone that night, and that most of those calls were made, quote, inadvertently. And make sure to remember those two phrases, butt dial, inadvertently, because those two phrases actually come up in Brian's testimony later on. Also, kind of further seems as if they had all gotten together, learned the same terminology, and all got their story straight together.
What's your explanation?
I think I was going back and forth to the door. I was texting him. I think I put my phone in my pocket. I think I inadvertently maybe have called him.
What did you call it at the last hearing?
I believe I called it a butt dial.
And it's not just one butt dial, correct?
There could be multiple, yes.
7 butt dials in the course of 19 minutes, less than 20 minutes, correct?
That evening, I wasn't paying attention to butt dials or calls. I was going back and forth, listening to music, being with family. So if I inadvertently called his phone, I did.
Not inadvertently called him once. 7 times, correct? According to you.
According to the record.
During this second trial, there was also motions 3 different times for a mistrial, but all 3 times they were denied. When they started investigating John's clothes, his t-shirt, his pants, and his hoodie, they were overlooking his clothing and noticed that his clothing, again, did not match up with someone who had been hit by a vehicle. His clothes were very dirty. They were very ripped. There were rips all over his shirt and his hoodie. But what we later found out at the trial, that these cuts actually weren't there the day of the crime, but were actually made later on by the prosecution. So Brian Higgins, Jen McCabe, everyone that is claiming that they had nothing to do with it, their forensic scientist by the name of Maureen Harnett was the one that made those cuts on John's clothing after the fact, which kind of sounds like tampering with evidence. But again, as of right now, Maureen faces no consequences and just gets to walk free for doing this. So Karen's lawyer was named Alan Jackson. Now, Alan Jackson is such an incredible lawyer, and especially for this case, I feel like he really just does get straight to the point. So going back into Jen McCabe, Alan Jackson was basically asking her questions about what occurred 2 years ago in 2022, and Jen McCabe's answer to everything Alan asked her was, I don't know, I don't remember, it was 2 years ago, how am I supposed to remember? And even at one point seems to be looking very overwhelmed and furious and just starts yelling and looking at Karen.
My client screaming into the phone that John never came home, waking you out of a dead sleep, correct?
Correct.
But when you recounted that conversation or those conversations to Sergeant Lank, you didn't say a thing.
I'm saying I don't remember the specifics of my conversation with Officer Lank. I'm also saying that I was woken up out of a dead sleep. Karen showed up at my house screaming. I went out to help her look for John. And then we found one of my closest friends on the front lawn. And she was saying crazy things and acting crazy and
Ms.
acting
McCabe,
erratic. And so every
Ms. McCabe,
police officer
that is not my
I
question.
spoke to,
Let her finish.
every police officer that I spoke to, I tried to answer their questions the best I could. It took me hours and in some cases days to remember all the things that Miss Reed had said. My mind, I was in a state of shock.
And your memory is getting better even as we sit here today, correct?
There are certain things I will never forget, Mr. Jackson.
Including the fact that you never, ever, ever said, she said the words I hit him to a grand jury when you were asked about it 3 months after the incident. Correct?
She said I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
You never told that to the grand jury, did you?
I don't remember specifically that every grand jury and everything I said, but I can tell you with 100% accuracy, she screamed, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
She had claimed when she was there, she heard Karen yell the words, I hit him, I hit him. That phrase was very prominent in her testimony because that was something that she very vividly remembered. But now Karen's defense team is now showing the court the original dash cam footage of that night with audio. And in that audio, you do not hear Karen yelling, I hit him, I hit him.
Will you please pay attention to the audio portion of this video as this is played? Could you hear that?
I could hear it, yes.
What did she say?
I have no idea.
Did she say, my boyfriend, I left him, and he never came home?
I could not make that out.
They even did a test with a test dummy of basically a car going 24 miles an hour and hitting a test dummy at the same location of where they believe John was hit. But again, the injuries on this test dummy did not align whatsoever with the injuries that were found on John's body that night.
Why did you utilize 24 miles an hour for this test?
There is a triggering event. The speed is approximately 24 miles per hour. So we did a test at the end point, if you will, in that data set.
Were you able to reach any opinions or conclusions as to whether the damage to the subject tail light is consistent with striking an arm at 24 miles per hour?
Based upon the test results, it's inconsistent with striking an arm.
And even Carrie was also brought up to the stand during this trial. Carrie was the girl in the beginning when John's niece had called Carrie saying that John hasn't come home yet and Karen's kind of freaking out. Carrie was also there at the scene when they discovered John's body. Carrie claims that she was doing CPR while Karen was doing mouth to mouth. And while she was being questioned, the court would also show more evidence and more dash cam footage of Carrie's actions that night.
That is Jen McCabe. That's Karen Reed. That's me.
Three of you being you, the defendant, and Ms. McCabe. What is it that you were doing when you first sort of come over to Mr. O'Keefe?
Well, Karen was laying on top of him, and I told her to get off him because I was going to do CPR. And I said, Jen, you need to call 911. And I started CPR on his chest compressions. And then Karen was giving him mouth to mouth.
And so for the most part, Carrie's story just kind of aligned perfectly with Jen's story. They basically said the same exact thing. And Carrie would also say, I don't know, I don't remember. So now going back to Colin, who was Brian Albert's nephew. So Colin was allegedly at this party and he claimed that he was not there when John was there. He said that he went over there for a little bit just to wish Brian Jr. a happy birthday. But what was odd is that even though he claimed he wasn't there, 2 weeks after the crime is when Colin would be seen on like a photograph. Basically, both of his arms are around two guys and he's just smiling for a picture, but you can see his knuckles, and his knuckles are extremely scuffed up as if he had recently just gone into a fight.
I was at a party, my house party my senior year, and I remember it being icy out, and it was kind of like a steep hill of a driveway, and I was walking up the driveway and I slipped down the driveway and I tried to catch myself, but I had something in my left hand, so I had tried to brace myself with my right hand, and I ended up sliding a little bit down the driveway.
What'd you have in your left hand?
If I remember, it was either my phone or a beverage.
But according to Colin's friend, who had picked him up that night at around 12:30, and there were text message conversations to prove of this as well, this girl basically picked up Colin from this party at around 12:30 and claims that John wasn't there when Colin was there, which again is very odd because from the text conversations, it seems like this girl never actually went inside of the home. So isn't she basically at this point just taking Colin's word for it instead of her own word for it?
Let's see, of Colin Albert being in the house at that time. What, if any, harassment was there in relation to that and in relation to Colin?
Well, no, go ahead, she can answer.
Colin wasn't at the house, so he's being harassed he was not at the house when John was there, so I drove him home. So people are harassing him saying he was at the house when it's not true.
So not only did he scrape his knuckles and claim that he scraped his knuckles after falling down a driveway, there were also 2 old videos of Colin that were brought up, where on both videos he was yelling at someone, telling them that he was gonna beat them up.
Your revenge boys, I will beat all your asses. I promise you, I will fuck you all up. Pull up, bitch.
Okay, and the next one, please.
You're a bitch, bro. Fuck you. Yeah, fuck you, pussy. Me cool, boy, you be knocked out. Hey, oh, bang, bang.
Walked up to you and said, I will fuck you up. I will beat your ass. You wouldn't take that as a threat?
If they walked up to me, yeah.
But if they didn't walk up and just shouted it across the street and stood there and said, I will fuck you up, I will beat your ass, that's not a threat.
I'm not sure.
And Colin's response to this, he basically said that those videos had nothing to do with John or the crime because those videos were taken in his sophomore year about 4 years ago. So now we begin to move into Brian Albert's testimony, the owner of the house, the owner of this party, and the person that probably knows the most when it came to that night and what happened to John. So Brian opens up his testimony literally by lying. He literally flies out the gate lying. Alan Jackson basically asked Brian, did you ever talk with this specific attorney named Lally? And Brian goes on to say, oh yeah, I talked to Lally about 2 years ago, but I haven't talked to him since. And then later on, a little bit of conversation goes and Brian slips up, oh yeah, I actually saw that in the prep and Lally was the one that gave me that. And Alan Jackson is like, but I thought you said you hadn't talked to him in 2 years. And Brian says, oh no, I did talk to him for the prep, but only the prep, trust me.
The last time I spoke to Mr. Lally was on a conference call around the time of my grand jury testimony.
Which would have been 2022?
Yes.
April of 2022.
Yes.
So you've not spoken with Mr. Lally since that time?
I don't remember speaking with Mr. Lally since that time, no.
What about anybody else from the district attorney's office?
No.
Were you told about any exhibits or documents that you might be shown?
Just in the prep, I believe I was shown a video of the waterfall bar.
And that was back in April of 2022?
No, that was for the prep for this trial.
With whom did you prep for this
I'm
trial?
Mr. Lally.
I'm confused. I thought you said you had not spoken with Mr. Lally since April of 2022.
Except for the prep for this trial, I had not.
Okay. That was my question, Mr. Albert.
Okay, I misunderstood your question. I apologize.
Now, Brian, in his original testimony, basically when talking about Karen, had said in his testimony, quote, I've never met or seen her in my life, maybe only like once. And this also would be quickly pointed out to be a lie because when they show the security footage of them at the bar that night, you see multiple times Brian Albert talking to Karen.
Pause it. Do you recognize the individuals in this clip?
Yes.
Who did it appear you were talking directly to, and who did it appear was answering directly to you?
I looked like I was speaking, but I can't say for sure that I was directly talking to the defendant.
Even though it looked like you were looking right at her and leaning toward her as she's answering.
I was definitely looking that way. I don't remember the conversation.
The reality is, we can take that down. The reality is, Mr. Albert, you had many conversations with her throughout the night, like you would with anybody else you were socializing with. Do you see the two men in the foreground?
Yes.
Who are those two men?
Looks like myself and Brian Higgins. So that's Brian Higgins, and that's me.
Pause. You see what you just did?
Yes.
What did you do when you slapped his right arm?
What did I do?
What did you do? What are you doing?
It looks like I'm just being silly, fooling around.
Okay. I'm going to ask you for a little bit more physical description. What are you doing? Why are you grabbing him from behind?
I don't really know.
Is that a wrestling hold?
No, I don't think so.
Control hold?
No, I don't think so.
Is that some sort of a control hold that you've used in the past?
Bear hugging somebody? No. That's just a silly, fooling around with my buddy.
You see what Mr. Higgins just did?
I did, yeah.
When you let him go, what did he do?
I don't know. He did some kind of, I don't know, he pretended to knee me or something.
Knee to the abdomen?
Yeah, I don't know if it made contact or not, but.
And so now they're able to finally reveal the people that were at the bar that night and everyone in attendance to the party afterwards. Brian Albert claims that the people that were there were himself, Tim Daly, his wife Nicole, another woman named Julie Albert, Brian's brother Kevin, his wife Jen McCabe, her husband Matt McCabe, as well as John and Karen. And then afterwards, when they went back to the house, the only people that didn't show up who were at the bar from Brian's testimony is Karen and John. Brian was also questioned that on the night of the crime, when there were police officers and ambulances and fire trucks all outside of his house at 6 in the morning, it didn't really make sense why Brian and Nicole never came out of their house and never tried to look for anyone, never tried to ask any questions or figure out what was going on. And on top of that, their German Shepherd Chloe, her dog bed was actually 6 feet away from the bedroom window, and supposedly she slept there every single night. So if they were just very heavy sleepers and didn't hear anything, Karen's defense is very, very confused as to why at least his dog didn't hear anything. But Brian Albert again just claims that he didn't hear anything, and the first thing that he heard was the lieutenant knocking on his door. So now let's get into Brian Higgins' phone history, which unfortunately there is a lot. So Brian Higgins did have an iPhone at the time of the crime, but then in September, 8 months later, he ended up getting a new phone. And if any of you guys have ever upgraded your phones before or got a new phone, typically whenever you get a new phone, the data that's on your old phone will transfer to your new phone. Apparently, during this transfer process of data on his old phone to his new phone, Brian claims that things just got lost, and certain text message conversations and phone calls were just lost during this process of transferring everything over to his new phone. And not only did he transfer everything over to his new phone, when he got to keep his old phone, he also destroyed the SD card of that phone as well to ensure that everything on that phone no one could access easily.
I don't think it was after the 22nd.
Could have been the 24th?
No.
Could have been the 25th?
No.
So you're absolutely sure that you could not have upgraded your phone and gotten rid of it anytime after the 23rd when this judge ordered that it be preserved?
No.
Because you know that if you got rid of that phone after you had been notified that you were ordered by a court to preserve it, you'd be committing a felony.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
September 4th was my birthday. The phone was broken and failing. I had planned on getting a new phone, and that just happened to be the day that I got it.
Happy birthday. Was that a coincidence? You were asked at another hearing in June of 2023 whether it was a coincidence. You remember that?
I don't.
January of 2022, that you were ordered to preserve it. Answer, yes. Question, that's a coincidence? Answer, yes. And that's what you're saying today to these jurors. Just a coincidence.
Yes.
And this is just so crazy. So when Brian Albert was asked if his home was ever investigated or searched through on the day of the crime or any day after the crime, Brian Albert replies with, "No, I wish they had."
The better chance that evidence can be manipulated or destroyed, right? You would agree with that?
Yes.
Did an investigator or any forensics team ever come into your house, ever, to photograph your entire home?
No, I wish they had.
Did an investigator, yeah, me too.
Objection, Your Honor.
Did an investigator or a forensics team ever come into your house to search for physical evidence?
No.
Did an investigator or a forensics team ever come into your house to search for trace evidence?
No.
Did an investigator or forensics team ever come into your house to take carpet samples, flooring samples from the basement, for instance?
No.
And to this day, you're aware that that's never happened.
Yes.
Brian Higgins is a police officer. Remember that text message conversation when they were saying the owner of the house? They were talking about Brian Albert being a retired Boston cop. So with him being a cop and understanding crime scenes, he, in that moment, could have told them to search his home. He would have been a complete open book if he had nothing to hide. So then that's when the defense also brings up Brian's phone call log history. And apparently Brian had called Brian Higgins at 2:22 a.m., but the call only lasted a second. And Brian Albert claims that this call was just a butt dial. But then after Brian butt dialed Brian Higgins at 2:22, Brian Higgins called Brian Albert back, to which that phone call lasted 22 seconds before Brian Albert had ended the call. Brian Albert then claims that this was just another butt dial, that he had picked up the phone and hung up the phone accidentally, and he also doesn't understand how the phone call could have lasted 22 seconds, which is odd because he looks like he knows a lot about lasting 22 seconds. And so there was also another call at 7:20 a.m. where that call lasted for 1 minute and 56 seconds, and it was a phone call that Brian Albert made to Brian Higgins. Brian Higgins then calls him back at 7:30 a.m., to which that call lasted 5 minutes and 47 seconds. Later on that day, Brian Albert calls Brian Higgins again at 7:57 a.m., and that call lasted 12 minutes and 33 seconds. And then throughout that entire day, Brian Albert continued to call more people. Brian Albert would then call his brother Kevin at 9:40 a.m., and that call lasted a minute and 50 seconds. At 9:50, the chief of the police station had called Brian Albert, but Brian Albert did not pick up and ended up calling back the chief at 9:54 a.m., and that call lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds. At 11:30 a.m., that's when Brian Albert would call Jen McCabe and then called her again at 12:20 p.m., with that call lasting 7 minutes and 52 seconds. Brian Albert would call his brother Kevin again at 2:01 p.m. and another time at 3:24 p.m. And then 2 more times, Brian Albert would call Brian Higgins, once at 6:15 p.m. and another time at 7:24 p.m. As you can tell, Brian Albert was in close communication with Brian Higgins most of the time, and that was because of security footage that was found at the local police station. In this security footage, it was taken place January 29th, 1:28 a.m. So for context, this would be before Brian Albert makes his initial call to Brian Higgins at 2:22 a.m. and also before Jen's Google search at 2:27 a.m. saying how long does a body die in the cold. On this security footage of the police department, you would see what seems to be Brian Higgins wearing a black hoodie, dark jeans, dark shoes, and his hood up. He then walks into a room that is suspected to be the evidence room. He walks into this evidence room at 1:28 a.m. and exits at 1:34 a.m., shutting the door behind him.
To the timestamp and date?
Yes, it says first floor corridor, and the time is 1:28:03 a.m. on the 29th of January, 2022.
Stop. Do you recognize the person in this video?
It appears to be Mr. Brian Higgins.
Okay, and what is he wearing? Describe it for the jurors.
Black sweatshirt with some sort of logo on the front. It appears to be blue jeans and shoes with a white trim.
And is the hood up or down on the sweatshirt?
It's up.
Okay, let's go ahead and play this. Stop. Now, if you could take a look at the time now. Okay, what's that time?
1:29:42.
Fair enough. And let's go ahead and play this all the way through. Pause. Does it appear from this video that the person has anything in his hand?
Can you play that again? I wasn't looking at the hand, but
Sure.
I really can't tell.
Okay, Pause. What do you see in that video?
It appears to be an individual wearing a black beanie hat, black dark colored sweatshirt with some design on it, and something illuminating by his face.
What time is that?
It says 1:34 and 53 seconds in the morning, a.m.
Does that appear to be the same person?
It could possibly be, yeah.
And does it appear as something in his hands up to his face, the right side of his face or ear?
Yes.
What do you think that is?
It's consistent with a cellular device, possibly a phone or a tablet.
Okay.
1:35 and 8 seconds in the morning, a.m.
Okay. And let's go ahead and play this through.
And then on June 18th, 2025 is the last day of Karen Reed's trial, and that's when her verdict was read.
Specifically number 5, operating under the influence of liquor by operating a motor vehicle with a blood alcohol level of 0.08 or greater. Correct? Yes. So say you, Mr. Foreman? Guilty. So say you all?
Yes.
Guilty. 003, what say is the defendant at the bar leaving the scene after accident resulting in death? The defendant not guilty or guilty? So say you, Mr. Foreman? So say you all? Jurors, hearken your verdict as the court records that you upon your oath say the defendant on 001 is not guilty, on 002 is guilty of operating under the influence of liquor, and 003 not guilty. Thank you.
All right, jurors, everybody please be seated. Jurors, we thank you for your service. We're going to send you back. Your service is complete. I'd like to come back and talk to you for a little bit afterwards. So thank you very much.
And yeah, that is the end of today's case. The verdict was actually read just last week on June 18th, and I've been keeping up with the case for the past 2 years. It's been something that I've been reading up on and kind of keeping tabs on to see if there's anything new. It seems like at times you're watching this and you completely forget that Karen is the one on trial, with just how much all of these people are lying. And I think their places of authority has to do a lot with how this case was handled. I don't believe this is the first violent crime that has ever happened in Canton, Massachusetts, and with everyone being police officers and lieutenants and sergeants, they have had years and years of experience and just kind of moving on autopilot. Whenever they go into a crime scene, they know exactly what to look for and exactly what to do. But it seems like in this situation, they were doing all of the opposite things kind of on purpose. If you were to take the authority out of all of these people and they were just regular people with very average paying jobs, this case probably would have been handled differently. And it's very heartbreaking to even think about all of the evidence that was on the scene, or all of the potential evidence that we will just never see again, because allegedly these people could have tampered with it. And if you are in authority and you are speaking with others in authority, those others in authority also have control over what happens to specific people because of their authority. I mean, you literally saw it in the first trial when it was declared a mistrial, and then afterwards all these jurors started to come out saying it wasn't supposed to be a mistrial. I feel like Karen Reed's case is more just a large step towards an even larger step for justice of John, because unfortunately, even to this day, we don't know what happened to John. All we know is that Karen didn't do it, which, I mean, it's been very obvious from the beginning, but that begs the question, what exactly happened to John? If John never went into the home, then how was he attacked by the dog? And if he was attacked by the dog, then he was probably in the home, but why does his phone history show that he was never in the home? There's so many unanswered questions, and it's even tough to say if even the evidence that we're seeing now has been tampered with. And at the end of the day, I feel like, again, this just is a large step to an even larger step to figure out out what happened to John and also charge the people with the crimes that they committed. But unfortunately, I don't really see any of these witnesses, Jen, Brian Higgins, Brian Albert, Michael Proctor. I don't believe they will come forward with their stories because, I mean, even 2 years later, all of them are trying to lie. I've literally shown clips in this video where they have lied on the stand. If they're lying about that, what else are they lying about? And why do they feel the need to lie if they're not involved or covering up for someone? If you are innocent, you are an open book and your truth makes sense. But when you're lying and you're also contradicting your story and other people's stories, none of it just makes sense. And again, I still don't understand why none of these people have charges against them, at least just for the DUI that we literally have footage of. But those are just my takes on the case, and I would love to hear all of your guys's in the comments below about the case. I know that there is a huge divide right now on whether or not Karen Read was not guilty or guilty. I would love to hear all of your guys' thoughts on that in the comments below. And also, if you guys have any extra information on the case that I did not mention in this video, make sure to also leave that in the comments below. There is so much to this case. As I said, it was 35 days. If you feel like you know everything about this case, chances are you still don't. So if you guys have any extra information that you found was interesting or crucial that I did not mention in this video, I know there's also some speculations on the basement of Brian Albert's home. Apparently they had gotten their basement remodeled, so some people were theorizing that possibly John O'Keefe had been in the basement at one point. But again, I would love to hear all of your guys' thoughts and comments in the comments below. And yeah, that is all from me. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and as always, I love you, I love you, I love you, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.